Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Very honoured to be here. I hope my voice holds out. I'm sure it will. And it's really nice to be back in Adelaide and UniSA in particular. I tell Ning all the time, I do miss UniSA and I miss a lot of things about Adelaide. One of the interesting and exciting things that someone just mentioned to me is a couple of weeks ago, David, your Vice-Chancellor, approved for me to be an adjunct professor, so I can maintain the connections, and the collaborations that, began here. So that made me very happy as well. I'm in a school too, just to let you know, and the school's called Computing, Engineering and Mathematics, so it's a little bit like the natural and built environment. Construction management is in there, it's buried in there, and they don't like that, so we're trying to sort of change that. But very, very strong program, that construction management program, been going for 25 years. And the engineering is very strong as well. The computing, not as strong, but it's still very respectable. And they've got, industrial design and starting architecture next year. So lots of interesting things, lots of mixes of disciplines. And I suppose that's what always interests me. Coming through from architecture, sort of design management, project management, construction management, sometimes I never quite know what hat I have on, but it makes life interesting. What I wanted to talk to you about, or what I was asked to talk about a little bit, was innovative research trends in construction. And what I thought I'd do is focus on smart construction and where that fits within the context of smart cities. And that might be a little bit of a different departure, but I think it's not a bad way for us as a discipline to start to contextualise our work as well. So these were my early thoughts about all of that. Now, many of you might be very confident around smart cities, so I'll move through that reasonably quickly, but I'll just give you some observations that I've made around, when people conceptualise smart cities, what they talk about, because it gives us an idea and a context for some of the things I'll talk about later on when I reflect on what's been going on for the last 10 to 15 years in terms of the ARC and in terms of what they've been doing in funding this concept, smart cities. So those are the things I thought I'd do, is think a little bit broader than just straight construction, because I think that's important. I think it's important for us to start to think about where BIM fits within the broader smart cities concept, or smart precincts, I think we're talking about these days, yep. And I look a little bit at definitions, but only just to show you, oh my goodness, there's so many people talking about it in such different ways. But we can actually identify a couple of interesting threads. Then, and what I've done, I'll just pick out a couple of key things that I've done, over the last couple of years, and just share a little bit of those thoughts and what those projects were about and where they sort of fit within that whole picture that I'm trying to paint. And then what next? I suppose I'll throw that over to you. When reflecting on this, I thought about, why do we even care about cities at all? And what is it that's important about cities? There's a lot of people who live in cities. It's a really fundamental thing. And it's quite interesting that 50%, these are some interesting stats, 50% of the population lives in cities, and apparently by 2050, there's going to be 75% of the world's population will live in cities. That's fairly significant when we think about it, isn't it? More importantly, and this is where I thought some other interesting things were emerging when I was doing a lot of reading around this, is that the fastest increase is in that population growth, is actually in the megacities. And many of those megacities are actually in developing countries. That's quite interesting for us, because often we put the lens of smart construction and we put a very Western thinking on it. So I think we should start to flip that a little bit and think about different ways of what smart construction and smart cities looks like. And I know a lot of you in this room are already doing that. One of the interesting things I found in my travels was that over 800 odd million people lived in slums as well. So that starts to really give us an idea of what we should be thinking about and the power of what we should be doing and the value that we can bring when we're thinking about smart construction, smart cities. It's important, and it's important not just to us in Australia, not just to Korea, but it's important to everyone in the world. So here, closer to home, I don't know what the percentage is. Sometimes it's 85%, sometimes it's 88%, sometimes it's 82%. It's a bit like a student-staff ratio in my school. It changes every time. But more than 80% of the population in Australia live on the fringes of the country and live in urban areas. So it's, for us, it's a really important area as well. We've got challenges in those urban areas. We've got challenges around urban development, in managing urban growth. Sydney has significant problems. Housing sector has problems. And that's sort of the area that I tend to focus on more specifically. Now, they're the bad things, but cities aren't all bad, are they? A lot of us live in them. They're good for economic development. 80% of the world GDP is actually created in cities. Career development. Some say that people can earn more than 3 times as much for the same job as someone in a rural area. You've also got to counter that a little bit because it actually costs more to live in a city as well, doesn't it? Sustainability. Some studies that I read, you know, it actually has a power and a leverage of the certain size of a city in terms of productivity and infrastructure. So it's probably like this tipping point in all of that. I then thought about what makes an ideal city? What really makes, you know, what is it that we at a fundamental level want from a city? And that gives us some hints about what are the most interesting things that will be of value to the policymakers, to the decision makers, to the government agencies, and to the leaders of industry when we're talking about our research projects. So this intensification brings problems with it, doesn't it? And we often talk about it, you know, as sustainability challenges or sustainability problems. We all want to live in a beautiful and livable city. Cleaner, quieter, safer, more accessible, resilient and healthier. That's what the ideal city is. Cleaner cities would have less trash, less pollution than current systems allow for. Quieter cities, what would they look like? It's much quieter in Adelaide. It's lovely in Adelaide compared to Sydney, I have to say. Noise from cars and an organised sense of the urban chaos that city dwellers have. Safer cities, what would they look like? They would be well lit, well patrolled, and have a strong sense of community. Accessible cities would make public transport, you know, accessible to everyone. Cheapest and easiest option for travel, negating the need for cars and congestion. All of these interesting good things that we want. Bike access as a priority. So ideal cities, if we're thinking about it, do these things. They make health and sanitation systems a priority. They're important. Healthcare is accessible, as well as fresh food, access to recreation, and great sewer and waste services. And I'm sure you could add to that list. There would be some other things as well. But those are the things I started to really think about. And then I questioned, well, what stops us from getting, you know, all of those things? What are some of the really big things? Okay, we have diverse competing interests. There's a lot of different stakeholders in a city who are fighting for what they want, whether it's a new motorway versus a new public transport versus light rail. Lots of different competing interests. Government budget cycles in Australia in particular are short term, and they don't really give that opportunity for this longer term sustainable thinking that's needed. Regulations can often hinder. Citizens sometimes are disengaged from civic processes around, you know, urban development. inadequate demand for sustainable business products and systems, allowing us to have a green economy. But the interesting one I always think is useful for me, because it's the area I often look at, is departments or government agencies are often siloed in the planning processes. And for nearly 25 years in Australia, we've seen problems around that. And I'm not so sure that we've really moved to solving those. We're trying, but we still have a lot of problems on the ground for people on major urban projects. So smart cities is something that can help us, apparently. They can help overcome the limitations of traditional urban development that tends to manage urban infrastructure systems in silos. My husband is a project manager of really quite major projects, and I almost hear daily the challenges and the problems around one government department has approved this and another one won't approve that, and this one is going to wait for that. So it's a challenge. But they all have their own rules as well that they have to follow. So somewhere along the way, we've got to actually come to some middle ground. So they're the sorts of interesting things I suppose Ning and I are going to explore later on in our discovery grant, aren't they? But one of the interesting things with smart cities is underpinning that around the difficulty of silos is this appreciation of data, an appreciation of how data can help solve some of these problems. It's probably not the only way, but that's one of the ways. And smart cities seek to do a bunch of things. They help connect different city stakeholders, improve city involvement, offer new and enhanced existing services, and finally provide context-aware views on city operations. Now, it's highly complex and challenging though. It's not simple. One of the key challenges is that we often speak from different perspectives. We often speak as either a technologist or a sociologist or an urbanist or a project managerialist, whatever they might be, environmentalists and policymakers. So we come from different perspectives when we talk about smart cities. When I jumped in and said, well, I wonder how we define what a smart city is, and I really just wanted, a quick definition that solved it. But what seemed to unravel was actually a lot of different interpretations of what a smart city is. So IBM and Cisco, who have probably made a lot of money out of this initiative, but that's okay, but they define smart cities from a very technical information management approach, which is obvious, isn't it? So one that makes optimal use of the interconnected information, etc. And Cisco, scalable solutions that take advantage of ICT to increase efficiencies, reduce costs and enhance quality of life. So it's all about information, it's all about enhancing the quality of life. Other definitions, other way people think about it, it's about citizens, it's about the people. So there's a very human aspect to it and a very human way of thinking about it. Manchester Digital Development Agency, Manchester, I don't know if you know, Media City near Manchester, in the docks area there is a smart city. And they talk about it as smart citizens, where people have choice and that you give them information so that they can do things, ride bikes or whatever. When I actually wrapped up a lot of that, there are different definitions and interpretations from a lot of different perspectives. Technology framework, a human framework, institutional, so governance, how we actually organise ourselves, and then an environmental framework. And there are a plethora of definitions and descriptions and interpretations, each from those different discourses, which is a really interesting thing. So digital city, intelligent, virtual, information city, ubiquitous, creative city, humane, learning, knowledge city. Really, really quite rich field actually once you start to unpack it a lot. These were two really nice broad definitions, I thought, that didn't sort of favour digital or favour environmental. They tried to sort of bring it together, you know, and talk about increased citizen engagement, hard infrastructure, social capital, digital technologies, and we want that to actually make our cities more livable, resilient, and better able to respond to challenges. The British Standards Institute actually defines it as another way: integration of physical, digital, and human systems in the built environment to deliver a sustainable, prosperous, inclusive future. Very, very lovely definitions that bring it all together. So then I jumped in to see, well, what have we been doing in Australia in this space? So the easiest way was I looked at the nationally funded projects. That's not to say that, you know, other projects aren't great as well. It's just the best database that I could find across Australia. So that's making it, sorry. In the ARC, if you went to see how many grants were won from 2008 to 2018 around the concept of smart cities, there were 10. There were 10 funded over a period of 10 years. I then thought, well, sometimes people don't, you know, call things smart cities, but they really are smart cities, and they're talking about that concept. So I tried a little bit further and I said, well, what about smart urban design? And those sort of projects, when I unpacked those, they were talking about smart cities. And that uncovered an additional 15. Then I thought, I wonder what the old architects are talking about in this smart architecture. And a lot of those are framed within smart cities concepts. Another 17. Then I did the final one, which I was pretty interested in. What are we saying about smart construction or smart buildings? Who writes stuff like that? And in that, I actually found 42. So we're very, very active in this space, which is fantastic. And then we also have, and some of you are probably involved in it maybe, the CRC for low carbon living. And that really speaks a lot about environmental and better planning and the smart cities concept. I think it sort of underpins a lot of what's being done in there. And there's 110 odd projects over the last 5 years. You know, so there's a lot of work going on in this space, which is terrific. When I looked at the urban ones, or the smart cities, just the ones that talked about smart cities, I started to unpack a little bit as to what was going on in that space. It's quite interesting. Now, I haven't finished all of this, but this is the first sort of look. So, I wanted to know from what perspective were they coming at it when they were talking about smart cities. 7 were from a field of research code 08, 09 and 10. Now that's, I've got it written down somewhere because I thought someone might ask me. But that's, you know, information systems, technologies, that sort of area. So what is it? 10, yeah, wireless communications, computer comms networks, database management, and what was the other one? 9 and 10. 9 is geospatial, environmental engineering and water quality, and 10 is wireless networks. 28, 29, there was only 1 in that area, and that was around decision support, simulation and modelling, but still very information systems, technology. If there's any computing people in the room, please forgive me for lumping you in the one box. I don't mean to do that. Then there was 2 that were, so one from a 12, which is us, built environment, and that one in particular was around urban design and transport, and then one from 1600, and the 1600 was, I think, urban and regional studies, so that's more cultural geography. And then there was 1 that wrapped up a whole bunch of things. So they were primarily from IT, really, when you think about it. Two from built environment, what I would call, you know, although the cultural geographers don't like calling them from the built environment sometimes, but primarily from the urban, the built environment sort of perspective. And then one that was really quite interdisciplinary. And I thought that was really interesting, given that it's a very interdisciplinary concept. So just some early observations that I've made around all of that work that's going on. It's not as interdisciplinary as I expected. There's many of the projects, it's about the agenda of the particular, you know, CI, and that's good because we always want CIs to be defending whatever their particular model is. But it's interesting that we have a very interdisciplinary problem, and yet we are looking at it very specifically from one discipline. We haven't actually crossed over too much into trying to bring it together, and maybe it's too hard, I'm not sure. There's a lot of modelling, a lot of tools and a lot of frameworks. So a lot of stuff is happening and a lot of very tactical, useful stuff, particularly in the CRC. I read through all of the 110 projects last week. Dio will be very proud of me. And there is a lot of great work, a lot of stuff there that's being provided to the industry. What I did notice is even in that space, a little bit of silos. You know, BIM it's mentioned as one or two projects. There's two projects in there specifically. And then I think there's another one around precinct BIM modelling or whatever. And they're really good projects and they're quite neat and boxed in. There's a lack of regulatory research. So a lot of this research does not actually take it further than simply, here is a piece of research, but I wonder how that actually transpires into application and impact. And those are the sort of things we're thinking about a lot. There's few links to policy change. So there's a lot of work going on, but not much reaching out to saying, how does this change policy? How would this change the decision makers? And so there's opportunities for us to actually make those links and to make those jumps. You know, these are the things. I've just spent all day yesterday in an AGM for ASBEC, which is the Australian Sustainability Built Environment Council. There is a crying need for research there, and there's this big gap between what I see as a lot of research that's actually really useful and exciting and challenging that's going on, and then the space of what they're looking at, you know, and the policy and the regulatory work that they're doing. A lot of your work can feed into what they're doing. In the smart construction space, there's an awful lot of work on materials and technology. Some fantastic new materials, new approaches. Vivian's stuff and her colleagues, a lot of really, really good stuff. There's Swinburne as well, so I hope I don't offend anyone. One of the things I think, and I've talked to our Centre Director for Infrastructure Engineering, who's a very, very straight technologist. And so we thought we would like to do some stuff together. And I said, I'm way over here with social science methodologies, and you're way over here, and this is Bajan, with technology and really smart infrastructure materials research. But we started to find some middle ground as to the work that he does, and then how does it translate into practical application. And we found a middle ground, and we've started to think through some work that we can do together. The context for enabling new construction technologies is often overlooked. And that's the piece probably that 5 minutes, that's okay. That's the piece that I probably focus on mostly, is I've done some work on off-site manufacturing, a bit on building information modelling, and then we're moving into digital collaboration. A project running now, finishing soon, sometime next year, Forest Wooden Products Association, and it was a project that we really wanted to look at the construction timber supply chain and a BIM decision framework. That was our goal. Now it built on some work that Ming and I had done in the CRC, some other work that I'd done for DISA, Department of Industry, Science and Resources, for Layton's, which was CIMIC, and then just a really, really small but lovely project that I enjoyed, which was around teaching and learning with BIM. And those projects sort of fed into this particular project. So the Forest Wooden Products Association were interested in this thing called BIM, smart technologies. There's a lot of highly engineered timber products. They wanted us to explore that. How do you catalyse change? You know, we talked about information, awareness, value propositions, a whole lot of things like that. One of the key things is that the industry partners were really keen on return on investment. What was interesting though, and we did 2 major case studies here, 27 odd interviews, we could not find the data to actually help us work out when those companies made a decision to invest in BIM, what was the return on investment. So that was quite interesting, that across all of those 27 companies, and some were really, really major too. It's not like just simple or smaller SMEs. So that was quite an interesting find in that project. The linkage grant that we are finishing off, and will finish off in the beginning of next year, is about efficient construction, analysis of integrated supply chains for off-site, innovative off-site housing manufacturing. Builds on a couple of projects, one in particular where we went to China a number of years ago to look at sort of lessons learnt or whatever, and I was asked by Department of Industry, Science and Resources to develop a research framework around off-site manufacturing, and this project sort of came out of that. Very social science approach. We wanted to look at what does a collaborative environment look like to enable off-site manufacturing to happen. And we did a whole bunch of case studies, finishing it off right now, collaborative practice model, and we've done a whole lot of training materials for the Master Builders Association to deliver through their simulation training centre over in Victoria. Now, one of the interesting things that came out of that, so we did this collaborative practice model that's got 9 elements. I know you can't read it, sorry about that. Those 9 elements are probably a lot of the things that you would think about as to if you're going to get off the ground something that's going to completely fundamentally transform the industry, then what would it look like? So, you know, leadership, shared goals, expertise, change management or approach to change, investment, shared space, shared physical space, and we just touched on a little bit about shared virtual space. The housing sector in Australia is not that, this was on housing, is not that engaged in BIM at the moment, but they're, you know, trying. Problem solving, a real attitude to not only solving problems but anticipating problems. So this is what the network of those 5 case studies look like. Those organisations that managed to actually get off-site manufacturing off the ground. How do they organise themselves, and then how do they respond to technical standards? During that grant, we thought collaboration was a really nice piece that came out of it, but the other thing that we realised was we boxed it around just developers or companies who had decided to do something big, right? Now, they had made that decision and they were investing not only people, but cash as well and time. But they often talked about if they didn't have this major project to enact this on, it would be really hard because there are a lot of things that happen upstream that hinder them being able to implement such a significant thing. So Frasers in this case had, you know, a whole suite of sites that they were developing over in Victoria, so they could then roll out the cassette floors. And then, you know, a bunch of the other companies had projects, the case studies had projects that they were rolling out their particular technology. But when they were faced with other situations that were a bit out of their control, where there was a different client, where a government department was releasing land, where they had to tender for the project, it became a different story. We didn't have the opportunity to explore that so much in this particular project, so that became something that we thought about for the new project that we were lucky enough to just win. So we're looking at rethinking housing, actor network analysis for digital collaboration. What underpins that are the concepts of smart cities. That's what underpins it. All of those things we talked about before. One of the things was that in the previous project there was a really light touch on digital and virtual. So you know when I said shared space, people did talk about it was important that we physically shared space when we were problem solving, but also that we had a virtual space as well. But that's as far as we got. So what we wanted to do in this project was take that a little bit further. That's all the reasons why it's a good thing to do, this particular grant. And I'm getting the wrap up, so I'll move through it quickly. One of the most important things is that we want to look at how all of these things are interconnected. So we are trying to be very multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary and bring a range of different stakeholders to actually exploring how does digital collaboration either catalyse or doesn't catalyse some of these exciting technologies like off-site manufacturing or whatever else happen, you know, and to solve some of those big problems in the housing sector. They're just the aims. I think I've just basically gone through those. Informed policy and practice is one of the key things that we really want to be able to do at the end of the day. So I suppose these were just some really high-level observations that I've made. So it is a pretty diverse field, but once you get into it and start to unpack it and see where smart construction technology sits within that, it's quite a rich and exciting area to explore. One of the things I think we haven't done is looked at smart construction technologies for smart cities in developing countries. I think that's a great area for future research. And collaboration on smart technologies and bringing them to market within the context of regulatory and economic challenges. And I think that's always going to be something interesting for us to explore. From a last word, from my perspective, sitting on the ARC panel, one of the most important things I think is to remember when you are asked to assess a grant, to be very, very thoughtful about this is your discipline that you're building up. Oftentimes I see assessors right across different disciplines, and sometimes we're tough on each other, and we don't have to be. We can be a little bit more positive. That's a message I'd probably leave with you, because then we'll all win more money. That's the subtext. Okay, I think nearly done.
Thank you.
Any questions? No?